It's important to remember that taking time to yourself, whether it's training for 30 minutes or an hour out of your day, is an act of self-love and self-care every single time. If you do not move your body, you will notice over time that you will start to feel sluggish. Hello and welcome to another vlog on YouTube and podcast on Spotify by the Fit Minds podcast. Coach Mariah here. Today we're chatting about a loss of drive, motivation and purpose to train in the gym. I've previously done a podcast on how to enjoy your training, so if you do enjoy this podcast, you should definitely go back through our episodes and listen to that one as well. But let's tackle this topic firstly by addressing what it may look like when you've lost your drive to train. If you've previously trained in a gym successfully and routinely, it might seem puzzling as to how we could possibly suddenly lose our motivation to exercise. If you have any experience prior with this happening over and over again, it might be the same recurring issues or multiple different issues causing the reason why you are trying to skip the gym or avoiding workouts or basically struggling to go back altogether. From my experience in coaching, there are generally major triggers or barriers which seem to lead to training complacency. Feeling lost, like you can't be bothered, not seeing the benefit or even feeling it physically or mentally, feeling exhausted and avoiding exercise as a result. Some triggers for loss of exercise motivation may include sickness, injury, life stresses, time management. Note how I did not say lack of time, as that's not actually the issue at hand. Low self-confidence, relationship breakdown, personal loss or grief, heavy career or family commitments, emotional distractions, boredom or lack of interest in the activity, lack of visible or performance progress, lack of energy, amongst other perceived limitations. These factors, amongst others, can act as a catalyst for a shift in habitual behaviours and can often present as a roadblock or barrier to exercise, which can ultimately snowball into continual days, weeks, and even months away from exercise. When listed and reviewed, we could even go as far to say these limitations, in some cases, may present as excuse-based explanations for avoiding exercise. And nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to admit that they are simply making excuses. Some of which are likely simply throwaway lines or perceived beliefs surrounding our exercise limitations. And some of which may have heavier plausible cause for taking time away from exercise. So see how I haven't said as a blanket statement, every single reason for not exercising is an excuse, but some may be deemed as excuse worthy and the others might actually have some plausible cause for concern and time off training. So how do we differentiate between complacency and legitimate struggle? And how can we begin to dig ourselves out of our exercise slump? Because the reasons for loss of drive to exercise will vastly differ, I'm going to focus less on the individual solutions and more on the kinds of mental and attitude shifts internally required to escape this reality and break a cycle which can oftentimes lead into further self-sabotage, as well as even sabotaging nutritional choices alongside the lack of exercise. Self-belief is the beginning of achieving any endeavour. It's a common misconception that in order to achieve a momentous goal, a human being must be gifted in that area. Of course, there are going to be some influences of overall genetics on a person's bone structure, height and body fat distribution, even ability to grow lean muscle mass. However, it's not going to present as the foundation for accomplishing a specific goal. And we must not dismiss ourselves with statements such as, I've never been able to, or I'm not good at this, or that person is just naturally gifted, etc. The fact of the process is that results are determined directly by effort in conjunction with an effective plan to accomplish that set goal. And also understanding there will be setbacks, struggles and challenges for absolutely every single person engaging in any endeavour to better themselves. Have the argument with yourself, okay? This is the part of the process where we start to fight back and actually get back our exercise time and our love for training. So have the argument with yourself. There are going to be days when you will have that internal voice that says, I can't be bothered. Even I have this internal voice. I'm not a person who goes about every single day feeling like doing everything that I end up doing. The voice says, I can't be bothered, I'm too tired, or I'm too exhausted, etc., etc. Maybe you have trained too many days in a row. Maybe you didn't, need to train today. Maybe you needed a rest day. It's important to understand the difference between mental and physical exhaustion. So, if you are feeling wrecked, is it because you've been exercising a little bit too much, perhaps? Are you physically feeling exhausted? Are you tired? Have you not slept well? Or is it mental exhaustion? Have you had a hard day at work or a hard week at work? Or, have the kids been giving you a hard time? Generally, you will find that you will know what your tether is with exercise though. Whether you can train 2 or 3 days straight and then require a rest day, but listening to your body is a part of this process. However, if you are just mentally exhausted, sometimes taking time away to do a training session is not necessarily a bad thing. This can help you to separate your personal and career stresses and take some time out for yourself. One of the best things you can do for mental stress, yes, you guessed it, is go to the gym. There is no coincidence that once you get into a session and put your phone down and don't pick it up again, you give yourself the opportunity to be mindful in the moment, and you'd be surprised how incredible you feel after you finish a session. No matter how terrible you felt when you began. Obviously, this would not apply if you are getting sick or you're currently sick. Training whilst you're unwell doesn't feel good at all. So not something I would necessarily recommend, but as we say in sports nutrition, if it's in your chest, if you have a chest infection, rest. If it's in your head, so it's neck and above, you should be okay to go again. Don't be disheartened by sickness though, or injury. This is going to be an incredibly common process from person to person and a part of the process of, life and your training journey. In the case of sickness, it's important to give yourself enough time to recover so that your sickness is not prolonged and you can come back more driven and stronger to be able to tackle your sessions once again. And if you are getting sick constantly, say more than 3 to 4 times a year on average, you are going to have to address your micronutrient intake as much as you probably don't want to. Meeting your daily minimum fruit and vegetable requirements, your vitamin D exposure, so sunshine, and your sleep and water intake, because these are the factors guaranteed to impact your immune system the heaviest. So they will have the largest influence. Sleep, water, not in this order, but sleep, water, and micronutrients, including vitamin D from sunshine. So fruits and vegetables inclusive in there as well. You cannot avoid it. You can't just eat fruit and not eat vegetables. You can't just eat vegetables and not eat fruit. If you are getting sick constantly, it is not by chance. It is literally going to be down to your nutrition and self-care. You can also be more inclined to become sick more often if you're taking on too much in your exercise regime. Yes, there is such a thing. This would look like a heavy load of training upwards from 1.5 to 3 hours of training per day, and it could look like doing that, 6 times a week. Double daily sessions or adding runs on top of your resistance training sessions, and not taking at least 1 to 2 full rest days from purposeful exercise. So not walking, because walking is not purposeful exercise, but let's say, for example, you're training every day, you're running every day, you're not taking any sort of rest days, and if you do take a rest day, you go for a run on your rest day, that is not going to be enough downtime. We are seeing with studies, especially with relation to immune recovery, that moderate exercise seems to have very positive outcomes for immune function. People who are sedentary, less so they actually get sick more often. And those who exercise too frequently at, I suppose, a length that is just too much for their adrenal function and central nervous system and sympathetic nervous system, and this can impact immune function. So there is basically such a thing as too little or too much exercise. Now, this can easily turn to training burnout. So obviously overtraining and impaired recovery or immune function and inevitable sickness and even injury. And I have done another podcast on the downsides to overtraining/overreaching. Design your training is another one. Design your training not only around your physical goals, but also around your enjoyment. Obviously, there are going to be some limitations with this because you may have conflicting aesthetic and/or performance goals, and your enjoyment for exercise may conflict with that yet again. For example, you may enjoy running, but you would also like to build a decent amount of muscle mass. Of course, there is a way to figure out how to be able to engage in both resistance training and, running to optimize muscle mass growth. But running may not necessarily be the highest on your priority list of exercise choice. So it might be something that you might do maybe once or twice a week, but understanding there will always be impacts from your runs on your total muscle gain capabilities. And that's just what the literature supports. Simply, it could be as well that you don't know your priorities. So we often talk about having priorities in the nutrition industry and fitness industry. There is a lot of back and forth about this because some people may get defensive and say, I just don't have the time, and you wouldn't understand because you have the time in your day to exercise, etc. But oftentimes we find that those who complain about not being able to exercise, not finding the time to exercise, or simply looking at every single possible obstacle in their lives that will prevent them from exercising. So it's almost like they're looking for reasons not to go ahead and do this. And I'm probably calling you out if this is you. It means that you're probably simply not prioritizing exercise. It also comes from a perspective that, you believe that exercising is an inconvenience and is much harder and requires a lot more effort than you would think. You may even have this perception of exercise being this extreme black and white version of life, that you're either exercising at full speed ahead or not at all. But it's about finding that balance somewhere in between. Currently, through pregnancy, I'm training 4 days a week, so there's 4 resistance training sessions, and I will do walks outside of that. And I found that is fantastic for my own general health, well-being, the baby's health, and so far so good. Been feeling great for it. So I figured out that 5 sessions was a little bit much for me during pregnancy. I could just tell my body wasn't too happy with that. And 3, I feel like I'm not doing much at all. So that's my happy spot. And obviously understanding that, this might look like 3 to 4 gym sessions per week and maybe walking outside of it. So as I said, similar to what I'm doing currently, but for those starting, maybe just 3 sessions, 3 gym sessions a week. They don't have to be very long. Even just tapering up to the amount over time that you would like to do. So whether it's 4 to 5 sessions per week or 6 if you're an avid gym goer, probably can be tolerated over time. And knowing that, a single drastic change from a sedentary lifestyle to an active one is not going to happen overnight. And neither should it, due to the fact that it's simply not going to stick very well as a habit if you run full speed ahead at a change of lifestyle. Of course, one of the major concerns we have around exercising or returning to exercise and fitting it in is that we do not have enough time. And the saying, although far too common, is incorrect. We do have time. Even the busiest of people do have time. It's just a matter of, I suppose as well, for those who are very busy, whether it is single mums, single working mums, what that looks like. It could look like working out in their garage. It could look like capping their sessions at half an hour. It could look like less frequent sessions spread across the week. But whatever it looks like, it doesn't mean that you have to allocate the same amount of time as what other people are for their exercise regime on a weekly basis. It is going to differ from person to person and from difficulty level to difficulty level. And obviously from circumstances and capacity, from person to person. Of course, we all do have busy lives. We all have completely different circumstances. Some of us have children, some are single mums, as I said, work full-time, study full-time. I run a business, 2 businesses actually, full-time, and study full-time. I'm pregnant at the moment, still training 4 days a week. And I'm sure that there'll be challenges along the way when baby comes, but I guess it's one of those things that instead of looking at it like a dreaded situation, a situation that I'm thinking that will box me in or that will give me a reason not to exercise, I'm going to look for the solutions on how we can make that happen. We still obviously have to look in the hours in the day that we have. And I really don't like the saying we all have the same hours in the day, because we don't. They look very different to one another's hours, right? So that whole 24 hours, we all have 24 hours. But I think it's more of a case of we have to audit our own days. So we have to look at what we are currently doing in a day. And if there is anything in that day that could be wasting unnecessary time, and I can guarantee there is for pretty much every single person who's listening to this podcast, we can all become more effective. Social media. I've called this out a few times. Netflix, and even staying at work too late, allowing people to push past your boundaries, driving to a gym that's too far away, that type of stuff. A lot of time management, which really needs to be taken into account. These can all impede on our time and the time that we probably should be giving back to ourselves, okay? One thing I stand by is that we set an example for our children. If we are talking about having those adversities and setbacks, and if we're not exercising to look after ourselves, how can we expect them to take a similar path in their life towards looking after themselves? Organisational skills and creating structure prior to commencing a training program or training endeavour can be an absolute saviour in the process. There is next to no point in having an intention to exercise, but not having anything written down, any plan, any routine, nothing in your calendar, no reminders, and just hoping to God that you will feel like training this afternoon. Of course not. And just obviously, not just organising your training, but also your personal life and career. So this is one of the major changes I made to my own lifestyle from, I think, a lifestyle when I was much younger, where I was living from moment to moment, so to speak, paying bills as they came at me, not having many savings back in the day, which I definitely have changed now. And just in general as well, the same went for my exercise. It was like I would just exercise sporadically when someone said, come for a walk with me or come to the gym with me, and that obviously wasn't cutting it. So one of the biggest changes I made was creating structure, and that was structuring everything from the day I do my washing to, I've talked about this so many times because it's so simple, the day I do meal prep to, all sorts of things. Certain days I do certain tasks on for my company as well. And obviously, putting the gym still to this day, 11 years later, in my diary every day. I make an appointment for myself. Obviously, there are going to be interruptions, especially when you have extra family members to think about. Changing circumstances, things being thrown at you all the time, and completely throwing that structure out the window. But if you allocate the hour in the day, and let's say worst case scenario, it no longer exists, there is another day tomorrow. But of course, creating as much structure as you can, obviously to plan for as much as you can, will set you up for a much more successful process rather than simply winging it every single day. And people can get stuck in this. They start to wing it because of these sporadic things that happen in their life. And they think that, well, you know what, I've just got to approach every day as it comes to me. And that's not the case. If you structure as much as you can, you actually prevent then yourself from falling down, more often. This is where obviously distractions can come into play as well. If we don't, put aside the time and allocate time to exercise prior to doing so, of course we're not going to be able to find the time, because all the other influences we have in our life will find their way in to fill the time in for us. Not just social media, but even online shopping, we can lose hours to it. Without solid structure and routine, it's incredibly easy to become distracted, scrolling on social media, online shopping, or even dragging a conversation out a little bit longer than it needs to be. I've mentioned in previous podcasts the importance of creating boundaries which often people like to perceive, as selfish. So boundaries is another one. I've done a podcast on creating boundaries. I think I have, or at least there's creating boundaries somewhere in there. But also creating structure and routine, like how to become more organized. Are you stressed or just disorganized? So these all tie back into my other podcasts. But I mention all of this because these are some of the reasons why we might lose track with our training and not be able to train as frequently. And these are just some of the concepts that tie back into how we can get back on track. So obviously having boundaries with others doesn't make you a nasty person, and can absolutely create and establish, and set boundaries in a polite and respectful manner so that we can make time to exercise. You'll be so glad that you did, and you will not resent your training as an inconvenience on your life when you are treating it as a non-negotiable form of self-care. Long sessions is another one, which are not sustainable or feasible. And sometimes engaging in exercise endeavours or difficulty levels that are just far beyond our current physical capabilities. And this is something that if you are working with a coach and your program is just too hard and you're thinking, oh my God, I've bit off more than I could chew, please have a chat to them. They can't really understand your capabilities online as well as what we could in person. So it's incredibly important to communicate how you're feeling to your coach. Oftentimes, this can scare a person off training if they feel as though it is not currently physically feasible or achievable. Poor recovery usually follows overdoing it in the gym. Don't be an all or nothing kind of person. Start to identify when you might be burning out or burning the candle at both ends with training, and look at tapering back permanently, or maybe just for now, or circumstantially when you're unwell, or you've had a particularly stressful week, a heavy work week, or a week of heavy personal commitments. It is very normal to feel particularly sore, okay, in the first week of training if you are heading back to training after a long period of time off. Don't let this scare you off and make you think that you're going to be sore forever. It is just an adaptation period. But it is crucial to hit your protein intake. Okay, this is what helps with muscle soreness. Ensure that you are consuming enough salt, so adding salt back into your meals, and consuming enough carbohydrates, other electrolytes and micronutrients from your food to allow for improved recovery. So if you are under eating calories, under eating carbs, you're doing keto, you're not hitting your protein intake and you think salt is the devil, it's not, it's got no calories in it, then unfortunately you're going to have a very bad time with your recovery. It's important to understand you'll need to be consuming enough calories for any form of exercise, even if you are in a calorie deficit. Yes, there is such a thing as under-consuming calories and basically shooting yourself in the foot. Having carbohydrates prior to resistance training sessions and most of your endurance-based exercise endeavors is incredibly crucial for providing sufficient energy to support the exercise process. There are some instances of, very high caliber endurance-based athletes that will train moderately low in carbs, not fasted, but this is not something I would recommend for the general population. It's just a little method we can use on the odd occasion with endurance-based athletes. We're talking about triathletes and marathon runners here, which I don't think I'm going to have any listening to this podcast. But for the most part, carbs, about 60 to 90 minutes prior to training, or even half an hour if you're someone like me who chews through it pretty quickly, will definitely give you that little energy boost that you need for your session. If you're eating too little in the way of calories, your low energy availability can simply lead to a shitty session. And then obviously if you're doing it over and over again, you're probably not going to want to go to the gym very much at all. Alongside dehydration and lack of sleep being some of the major causes for lack of energy in your sessions. There has been significant study into nutritional intervention to improve recovery from exercise. And in fact, this will have the largest influence on recovery from exercise of any type of thing that we can do. So, nutrition is honestly responsible for so much. So this is why nutritionists have an incredibly important role in your life. So if your nutrition is not adequate, you're likely not going to be performing or recovering adequately. And that is enough to make you feel like you don't want to show up. You can work with a professional coach, dietitian, or nutritionist in establishing exactly what nutritional requirements you will need for your specific goals, lifestyle factors, and overall health. That is why we have studied for as long as we have. Your sleep is going to have a massive influence on the energy availability that you have for your sessions as well. If you're sleeping less than 7 hours daily, mostly for men, and less than 8 for women, this is going to be a major issue. Especially if you're exercising frequently, you're going to feel like absolute shit. So for women, if you are exercising frequently, requirements can even be up to 9 and 10 hours. It's crazy, isn't it? I know for myself, if I don't get 8.5, I feel like trash. Whether it's broken up, it doesn't really matter as long as you get those hours in some way, as much as you can. And for men, who are training and exercising frequently, it will look like upwards from 7, so 7 to 9, even for men who are training at higher intensity for prolonged periods of time or more frequently. We see increased instances of injury, with higher levels of sleep deprivation, lack of sleep quality and duration, whereby your body is not able to identify carbohydrates as an energy source through a process called insulin resistance. So it's funny how this term is thrown around a lot on the internet, but funnily enough, sleep is one of the major influences on insulin response, which is generally more common with those who are struggling with sleep deprivation and lack of sleep quality. So insulin resistance can definitely be a serious risk posed for those who are sleep deprived, and this is where we can also see the risk of diabetes creeping in there. If you are interested in how to improve your sleep quality and duration, I have done another podcast on the importance of sleep for your training, health, and well-being. So this is why I do all these podcasts, is because they're all inclusive and I try to address the topics as broadly as possible. And weirdly enough, as concentrated as possible. Another factor often overlooked is going to be your caffeine intake. If caffeine intake is too high or too close to your bedtime, roughly 10 hours prior to falling asleep, you're going to have issues with sleep quality and duration. In turn, your energy levels for training and life in general. So, there's people who say I live off coffee and then I have shit sleep and then I live off coffee and then I have shit sleep again. Yep, that's a cycle. You are actually responsible for that. So caffeine is not something you should become reliant upon for your energy production, because your natural adrenal function is impaired by your caffeine intake. Yes, there is an advantage to using caffeine prior to training. We do see, there are some marked increases in performance for caffeine usage. However, there is always a however. There is definitely such a thing as too much caffeine. Basically, in this process, if you are having too much caffeine daily, your body will eventually adapt to the level of caffeine that you are consuming and reduce your own natural adrenal function and energy production to compensate. And you can end up with significant adrenal fatigue over time without even realizing your lack of sleep depth and length and high caffeine intake is likely to blame. Now, this is not in the case for everybody, but I have discovered with a lot of clients struggling with sleep quality and duration that their caffeine amount, not even when they're having it, but sometimes the amount of caffeine they're having daily is causing some serious sleep deprivation and even in some cases heightened anxiety. That doesn't mean you shouldn't consume caffeine altogether. I'm not the caffeine police, but certainly stick to the daily recommendation for your body weight. For under 18, so anyone who is under the age of 18, this is no more than 3 milligrams or 3 megs per kilo of body weight. And for over 18, so those over 18, 400 megs of caffeine total per day. And it's interesting because some energy drinks, large energy drinks, will have this amount in one of them, in a singular drink or just under. So another way to get motivated for your sessions, this is probably one of the more obvious ones, but I wanted to address the lifestyle factors that I see to be quite important, overlooked first. Another reason to get yourself back into the gym, or at least a motivator, is to buddy up with somebody for your sessions. If you find you're able to enjoy exercise more when training with a friend, your partner, or a family member, why not tag along with them? If you can make a session more enjoyable, help the time fly by and help you push yourself on days you don't feel as driven, why wouldn't you do that? And sometimes there are people out there who do want to train with you, you've just got to look for them. Even an in-person PT can be handy for this if you don't have anybody in your life that currently trains in the gym. Or if you sign on with a coach like me, you'll have access to a training app to track your progress and it will notify you of your PBs, your last session's weights, reps, etc. to beat. It's proven that tracking progress by writing it down or following a structured program can help to encourage you to continue to train and better yourself each session and each week. Okay, so there is no point just rocking up to the gym and just winging it, as this gives you something to gauge your progression by and leaves you with a feeling of a sense of accomplishment and gives you something to look forward to doing for your next session. On that note, you can look at restructuring your program with a coach if there are certain exercises that just aren't working very well for you. And this is something I do quite a bit with clients. Of course, I structure their program in the beginning around their injuries, imbalances, everything like that. If someone has one leg that's bigger than the other, we'll look at isolating their legs a bit more. And even so, if they've got back injuries, it's probably less likely that I'm going to be putting them under a barbell for a back squat. Some coaches, weirdly enough, will still do this to this day, even if a client has had very little success with that movement path or pattern in the past and recurring injuries, even with physio and intervention. But I will collaborate with clients. So I'll often talk to them, how is this feeling for you? And even first I work on form before I establish that the person probably just isn't meant to do, barbell RDLs or probably isn't meant to do a hack squat. There are some people, especially with their structure, their femur length, their hip width, the way that their body is put together, that these exercises just don't agree with them, and there are definitely alternatives. So most of the time we don't enjoy an exercise type because we are not skilled at it yet, or we don't feel it in the muscles that we should. So, you can probably agree with that. There's a reason why. Or also difficulty level. So if something is just really hard to do, like Bulgarian split squats, some people do enjoy them though, because they've obviously mastered them over time. And some people are suckers for pain, and that's why they enjoy the exercises that hurt the most. But this is why having a coach who tailors your training to your needs and your own bodily structure and movement patterns can be far more helpful than signing up to a coach who gives a cookie cutter program or dictates that you have to do an exercise even if you find it extremely uncomfortable. So we do know those people on the internet currently that pump out programs that don't tailor, every single client that goes onto my books that is paying me a weekly fee, whether it's the Fierce Journey, the Comp Prep people, the macro coaching clients, they're all going to have tailored programs. And even if I do work off a basic structure, I'm still going to tailor their programs based on their feedback and around what we need to do to adjust that program specifically for their movement patterns and also their specific needs. So for myself, I don't do certain exercises because for years they've just never agreed with me, and there are other alternatives that can basically achieve the same result. There are plenty of alternative exercises that can be programmed instead, and as we say with training, there's more than one way to achieve a desired outcome. On that note, however, be careful not to glorify changing a program constantly just for the sake of it, or asking for complete program changes every week or every 4 weeks just because this is what you've received before from another coach. The current evidence supports following a structured continual program for at least 12 weeks to induce the correct adaptations required for strength increases and muscle growth. So to optimize your results from that program, you need to follow that for at least 12 weeks, if not longer. I have followed mine for much longer than 12 weeks at times. Basically, if you change a program too soon, you may be selling yourself short of progression in that program with exercises that you haven't really reached your full potential with just yet. Try to shift your focus away from constant exercise variety towards embracing the variety you already have across your current program and endeavoring to improve your lifts, reps, skill, form, and control each session. Work on improving your form and control over time. Try to shift your focus away from lifting as heavy as possible every single session or as quickly as possible to perfecting the art of training with efficiency and efficacy. You'd be surprised how much more you will feel like you're engaging a muscle group when you work on your form for that exercise. And this is where working in with a coach can be incredibly handy and, yes, at times humbling. Commit to regular times and days for a sustainable exercise routine weekly. So this one's incredibly important and ties back into creating structure and routine. Write your routine down in your phone, on your fridge, in your diary, or in your phone calendar. Set reminders for training times and durations. Set and forget. Keep it on a recurring schedule. Normalize the idea, all right, that you are not always going to be in love with the process. Some weeks you'll dread it, and some weeks you will thrive in it. Don't allow a rough week or a rough day with your training become the sum of how you believe that you will feel forever. Give yourself timelines to achieve certain goals and make them reasonable and feasible, which is something that you can discuss, yes, with a coach. Give yourself goals to progress with your lifts, either slightly heavier weights or reps or both each week. Take deloads when you're starting to feel wrecked or like you're about to get sick. A week off training every 12 to 16 weeks may actually do you the world of good. You can even extend that longer if you're feeling fine for that duration. And it can give your CNS a chance to recover, central nervous system, so you can actually start to miss your training when you've finished that deload week instead of dreading it every week that you have to return. Reset as quickly as possible from, setbacks, and forgive yourself as quickly as possible as well. I've used this saying previously in podcasts, but if you forgive yourself as soon as you can after making a mistake of falling down, you'd be surprised at how much easier it is to get back up again. Don't dwell on things for too much longer than they need the energy for. If something has happened, it's happened, and there's nothing you can do to change that most of the time. So if you've taken time off, you've gotten sick, you've gotten injured, you've had a really busy week, there's no point in creating more of an issue from that and then, continuing that pattern onwards any longer than it needs to go. Many people dwell on things like getting sick or injured, relationship breakdowns, and then end up snowballing with the life setback. It becomes a mountain out of a molehill, and despite obviously sickness, grief, and relationship breakdowns and trauma feeling incredibly heavy at the time, of course this is valid. I must stress that going through this stuff in life does hurt. It is difficult. But once we start to recover, and we will know when we are recovering, it's like crawling out of a hole. In the beginning, it's going to be difficult. And of course, we take baby steps towards what we are wanting to achieve. But it's important to be gentle with ourselves in that process at the same time. We cannot simply bounce back out of situations nor expect ourselves to. Of course, some people may be able to and others may not, depending on the situation and depending on the person. But a large part of this process is also about building resilience and understanding that exercise is a part of looking after yourself, even when you are physically or mentally struggling. And in fact, maybe especially when you are physically or mentally struggling. So it might be that maybe just going for a walk is better than sitting on your bum all day, unless you're injured. Okay, unless you've got a broken foot or something like that. Maybe you don't need to go for a walk. Giving back to yourself can actually assist greatly with the process in healing, nurturing, and rewarding yourself. And it's a great outlet as well, which is why we need to see exercise as a form of self-care instead of something that is an inconvenience and takes up our time in our lives. And every time we feel lost, continuing to remind ourselves why we started. Sometimes remembering the excitement and motivation that we had in the beginning of our journey can reignite our training flame. On that note, treat your training like self-care, as I said before. Now, of course, this is going to be difficult because there's going to be an aspect of training which is hard and taxing. So, when people think about self-care, they think about massages and relaxation. They don't think about going and exercising, which is unfortunate. But it's going to leave us feeling like we've accomplished something after we have achieved it. And other times it's going to feel simply difficult to just start the session. So we've been there before. We've all been in a situation where, it feels like pulling teeth. It's important to remember that taking time to yourself, whether it's training for 30 minutes or an hour out of your day, is an act of self-love and self-care every single time. If you do not move your body, you will notice over time that you will start to feel sluggish. Sometimes even with symptoms creeping in, such as anxiety and depression, if they have existed before, even more so, or making an appearance gradually over time. There is no coincidence after a great workout, you leave the gym feeling amazing and vigorized, but you'll never know what that feels like if you don't let yourself step foot into the gym in the first place. Sometimes it's about taking that critical first step, despite it feeling like the last thing that you want to do at the time, and also having fear and dread. These are all obviously internal processes that are holding us back. And just thinking about how you'll feel afterwards. That delayed gratification and not necessarily having something incredible in your hands straight away, but understanding and reminding yourself of the benefits that you will receive afterwards. Remembering the feeling you've felt so many times before, the amazing feeling you've felt so many times after smashing out a great workout. And even if you do engage in workouts that aren't your best, okay, sometimes it's nice to be able to pat yourself on the back for just achieving something as simple as moving your body. It's as crucial as eating well, drinking water, getting enough sleep in. These are the bare basics of life, and I don't know how we've gotten it so backwards, but somehow we have. Which brings me back to priorities. If we really think about it, our highest priority in life should be keeping ourselves alive. If people talk about, I've got this to do and I've got to go make this and I've got to book this appointment, it's like none of that freaking matters if you're in the ground. And over time, if we don't look after our bodies, we do deteriorate. Our health does deteriorate. There is plenty of evidence to support it. And obviously, keeping ourselves well, for that matter. It is proven that exercise has the capability of releasing happy hormones into our system, which lift our mood, create energy, and build our body's robust ability to move and function daily. And not just that, people who exercise live longer. It's wild. Preventing things like falls and accidents later in life, making life easier. Simple tasks such as taking groceries inside or mowing the lawn, the benefits of regular exercise are exponential. If you haven't listened to the podcast about the benefits of exercise for women, you should do so. It's a very popular one, including benefits from an early age all the way through to menopause and, yes, beyond. I highly recommend you scroll back through the episodes and listen to that one as well. And sometimes we need to remind ourselves of these benefits as a major reason for exercising in the first place. Okay, so when we do lose our mojo, sometimes we actually need to think about why we're doing it. Why are we going to the gym? There is no denying that most of the time when we exercise, we feel good for it. And oftentimes we can reach for other sources of entertainment or pleasure or downtime, such as watching movies, TV, drug use, alcohol consumption, etc., amongst others. Exercise can only really have harmful effects on our body if we are engaging in a little bit too much for what our bodies can tolerate, or certainly using poor form. But other than that, and obviously not recovering adequately with nutrition, because that's when we have damage that can't be healed, can't be recovered, or certainly not as effectively. So that's when we have poor recoveries when exercise. But technically, it's not the exercise; it's just the nutrition that's going to be the issue. Other than that, outside of injuries, which are the obvious one, we really don't have any reason to avoid exercise for the negative impacts, other than it takes effort, which I think is a cop-out. Some people say things like, I don't like exercising because it's boring, or, I don't like feeling exhausted or out of breath. That's just pure laziness, honestly. It is. It's complacency and laziness, and it's avoiding something because it's difficult, and unfortunately, that's not going to be something that will work for you in any area of your life. If we do injure ourselves, it's important to prioritize rest, recovery, and rehabilitation instead of avoiding exercise altogether. So something I've seen commonly. Consulting a physio or a rehab specialist and figuring out how you can get back to your exercise safely and comfortably, but obviously progressively. So much of returning to exercise involves giving ourselves reasons as to why we can and how we can instead of how or why we think we can't, or creating reasons to support our bias that we can't. So it's funny, but we seem to build this fortress around I can't exercise or I can't make it to the gym, mostly because we don't want to. Yep, that's really why. Because people are avoiding what requires effort, and they seem to amplify this in their minds. If you think you can, you will. If you simplify the process, you will. Believing in ourselves and in our capabilities, okay, is key. Because action begins with self-belief of what we are capable of. Our belief determines our capacity to achieve. There is no sort of magical unicorn thing that allows a person to be capable other than their mind's thoughts of doing so, other than actual physical disabilities where a person cannot physically move their body. For those who are able-bodied, yes, you can. You absolutely can. And it's your brain and your mind that's holding you back. In reality, every single person on this earth that is able-bodied is able to exercise. Even people who don't have legs have arms, okay, if they do have arms. And I know it sounds odd to talk about this, but there are people out there who don't have legs, who do have arms, who find a way to exercise, or vice versa. It is incredible what happens when people believe in themselves. The gratitude we should have daily for that privilege and opportunity should be executed in the practice of exercising as frequently as possible, but also understanding the importance of rest in between. So again, it's not this black and white type of attitude. So if you are overdoing it and you're not taking rest days, as I said previously, this will be a crucial part of the process of finding that balance. And maybe that's the reason why that you haven't been going to the gym as frequently. Maybe you haven't found that balance. And not necessarily working in these extremes all the time. The most successful, healthy, and well-adjusted human beings are going to look after themselves from the inside out on a daily basis. And understand the importance of when to go and when to stop, or pause, rather. It doesn't necessarily mean they need to stop forever, though. And taking a little bit of time off to allow life's challenges to pass is completely okay. Okay, it doesn't make you a less of a person. Identifying when it's time to get back up again is the key. Okay, so knowing when the time is right. Don't waste time worrying or stressing about how much time you have taken off. It doesn't change anything. You're only going to make an existing issue worse by amplifying it. Get back on track as soon as you can. Take your time and ease your way back in. Don't go from 0 to 100 or you may crash just as fast as you started. And try using self-affirming internal dialogue that you are capable. You are going to feel much better for engaging in exercise, and it is possible and achievable to sustain a moderate level of exercise with a decent routine in place. It doesn't have to be complicated, so don't try to make it more complicated than it really is. Exercise is a basic human function and something that we should all endeavour to pursue in some way, shape or form on a fairly regular basis. Ask yourself, if I wasn't doing this, exercising or going to the gym, what would I be doing? What else would I be doing? And is it going to serve me as well to choose to do that instead? Should I be on the couch watching movies all day just because I feel like it, even though I haven't exercised in a few days? Sometimes I ask myself, what else would I be doing? And that's enough to get me to get off my bum, get in the car and go to the gym. Even something as simple as getting changed into my gym clothes at a certain time of the afternoon, eating a pre-workout snack that I like, putting some music on that I like, and getting ready. This can be a part of establishing the routine required to get yourself into healthy daily habits. And once we are in habits, it's much easier to sustain because it's habitual, it's a subconscious behavior, it's something that we can do naturally and quite easily. And of course, in the beginning, it's a conscious behavior that we have to try to attempt to instill. So conscious effort is something that is much harder in the beginning, which becomes subconscious effort, which becomes easier because it becomes habitual, second nature. After a couple of weeks of purposeful planning, it will become second nature to exercise frequently, and you will feel more out of routine if you don't. So we've all been in that situation where we haven't trained for a couple of days and we think, this doesn't feel right. That's when you know that you've made it. Finally, to finish, just remember that exercise is your friend, okay? not your foe. If we change the way that we perceive exercise, along with its benefits and our capabilities to exercise, so our perception is actually what determines whether or not we exercise, not what our physical capabilities actually are. And sometimes it is, right? But most of the time it's not for long. So we know they're temporary. But it is our perception of what we are capable of that determines our capability, right? So more so than anything else. We will change our experience, okay, of incorporating an essential part of maintaining health into our daily lives. All right, that's it from me. Looking forward to doing another podcast for you soon. Thanks a lot. Bye.